السلام عليكم. المرة اللي فاتت اتكلمنا وشرحنا البوم بتاع جون كيتس When I Have Fears، ووقفنا عند الفاينل رايمنج كوبلت بتاعها. هنكمله النهاردة وهنشرحه وهنشوف فين الجزئية اللي بدأ فيها التغيير في تفكير جون كيتس في البوم. بعد ما كان طول الوقت بيتكلم على his fears، اتنقل بعد كده وظهر لينا رؤية تانية ليه خالص وضحها في الفاينل رايمنج كوبلت. When I have fears of the wide world I stand alone and think till love and fame to nothingness do sink. Finally, in this final rhyming couplet, after reflecting upon his feelings, which the act of writing this sonnet has involved, Keats thinks about human insignificance compared to the whole world. He finally accepts the unimportance of his desire for fame and love, and thus ceases to fear and yearn. He realizes that death turns everything into nothingness. Therefore, his high hopes for fame and love are not worth such intense stress. يبقى في الفاينل كوبلت كيتس بيغير كل رؤيته ووجهة نظره وكلامه اللي كان بيتكلم فيه في الثري previous quatrains بتوع السونت. In the first quatrains he expressed his fears regarding not being able to achieve fame and success, not being able to leave a legacy behind, not being able to write as many books as he wishes. He also expresses his fears regarding being unable to use the different elements of nature in his poems and to make use of the beauty of nature in his poetry. And finally, his fears regarding his inability to meet the woman he might love. Then finally, all of a sudden, there is a change in the tone, there is a change in his outlook, and finally, he tells us, after reflecting upon his feelings, he tells us that all of a sudden, he realizes that compared to the whole world, he is insignificant, and therefore all his fears are insignificant too, and that when he dies, everything will die with him. Therefore, there is no need for his intense stress since he is dying anyway, and since everything that he is afraid of will also die, because humans and everything are mortals. Nothing will remain. Death will take everything with it. The figures of speech in the final couplet, wide world. We have alliteration because we have the same sound, the same initial sound, wa, wide, wa, world. This alliteration creates rhythm and also suggests the vastness of the world. So he's using words with the initial sound, same initial sound, in order to give musicality to his poem, and again in order to suggest how wide, how vast, how huge this world is. Therefore, he, compared to this vast, big, huge world, is totally insignificant, and therefore he doesn't have to worry much about all these fears. The sonnet always has a turn, a point in the poem that signals a major reversal in the thoughts or desires that shaped the first lines of the poem. Usually, the turn occurs around line 8 or 9. Keats starts his turn in line 12. He has spent much time thinking about fame and love. The first section develops a single concept, his desire for love and success, and his certainty that death will cut those desires short. Then the poem turns. There is a change in the tone of the poem. There is a change in Keats' thoughts. The second section reverses these thoughts, taking the poem to a new direction. Now his focus is wider. It's on the wide world, and the last lines reject all of his desires as futile. يبقى after expressing his fears in the first three quatrains, in the first part of the sonnet, there is a change in his thoughts, and this appears in the final couplet. Now his focus is wider, is larger. He does not only focus on himself and on his desires and on his fears, but he focuses on the wider world, on the big, huge world in which he himself is a tiny part in this world. Therefore, he stops worrying and he rejects all his desires as futile. The theme of the poem. What is the theme? What is the message? What is there behind this poem? The theme is human mortality, which is one of the famous themes of the Romantics. Keats is afraid of death at a very young age, but his fear is justified. He lost his father at the age of 8. A year later, his grandfather died. In his early teens, his mother died. Exposed to so much death at a young age, Keats realized the transience of life. The sonnet gives expression to his personal fear of his own early death, which would doom to oblivion his human longings and artistic ambition. So, because Keats has been exposed to several deaths in the family, he started at a very early age to realize the fact that life is transient, okay, and that everybody is leaving this world. He's aware of human mortality, and this theme is one of the famous themes of the Romantics, and we mentioned before that the Romantics used to reflect nature in the poems, to reflect its importance, to reflect emotions, to reflect their thoughts, to reflect their ideas about the world and about life. Keats is afraid of death because, but we say that being afraid of death is very much justified because he has seen many members of his family dying when he was still young. His father died when he was 8, and then his grandfather, and then his mother, and then he himself was sick and died at the age of 25. Therefore, he knew that he was going to die at an early age. He knew that. That's why he was worried all the time. He was worried because he felt he wouldn't be able to realize his dreams, to achieve success, to write as many books as he wanted. He was very afraid not to meet a woman to love. He was afraid not to be able to use nature and the different elements of nature in his poetry. He was afraid of not being able to do all these things that he wanted to, that he wished to do, because of death. Therefore, it is important to note that he was not afraid of death in itself. He was not afraid of death, but he was afraid because death will prevent him from achieving success. Death will prevent him from realizing his dreams. Okay? Death will doom to oblivion all his human longings and artistic ambition. Therefore, finally, he realizes that he shouldn't worry because death will take everything with it. This is the theme of the poem. We analyzed the whole thing. We analyzed the different figures of speech and everything regarding When I Have Fears, and then we will move on to another poem by one of the Romantic poets, one of the major Romantic poets actually, William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, one of the greatest English Romantic poets. William Wordsworth, 1770-1850. William Wordsworth is regarded as the father of English Romanticism. He is often referred to as the poet of nature, as most of his verse deals with natural description and a call to go back to nature in order to feel the presence of the Spirit of God. يبقى زي ما احنا شايفين ان ويليام Wordsworth is regarded the father of English Romanticism. He was a very famous Romantic poet. And he is often referred to as the poet of nature. ليه الاسم ده؟ ليه اللقب ده طلع على ويليام Wordsworth the poet of nature؟ لأن most of his verses deals with natural description. He loved nature, and we will see the reason behind his love for nature. He loved nature because he used to live in the Lake District, a very, very beautiful place. Maybe that's behind the reason behind his love for nature. He was very famous for his love and for the verses that dealt with natural description and his call to go back to nature in order to feel the presence of the Spirit of God. It is there around us in nature. In the summer of 1802, William Wordsworth traveled with his sister Dorothy to Calais, France. They stopped in London, and when they left, it was early in the morning of July 31st. They crossed over the famous Westminster Bridge to get out of town. Wordsworth apparently wrote the sonnet while sitting on top of his couch. Maybe he was so awed by the city because he didn't live there. He spent much of his time in one of the most picturesque natural landscapes in England, Lake District. The poem is remembered not as a biographical record, but as a beautiful depiction of London in the morning. This is very important. It's not a biographical record of the journey, but it is well known as a beautiful depiction of London in the morning. So this is the occasion of writing this sonnet by William Wordsworth. He was traveling to France together with his sister, and they stopped in London. When they left, it was very early in the morning. So Wordsworth had the chance to see London at a time when the city is peaceful and quiet. He was very much inspired by the scene. He was very much inspired by the beauty of London and the beauty of nature there, and the intermingling between man's made beauty and the natural beauty. Therefore, he wrote this beautiful poem. The poem is not considered or remembered as a biographical record, but it is known and remembered as a beautiful depiction of London. We say that maybe he was he admired London at that time very much because he spent most of his time in one of the most picturesque natural landscapes in England, the Lake District. And here is a picture of the Lake District. You see how beautiful the place is, the greenery, the natural landscape. This is the place where this is not actually his house or where he used to live, but I mean these are pictures for the Lake District in order to show you the environment in which Wordsworth lived and how much he loved nature because of the environment that he used to live in. And this is London. At the time he wrote this poem. You see the difference between the two places, the busy center, the busy city, okay, the high buildings. So there is a difference between London and the Lake District, the place where he lived. But when he wrote this poem, it was very early in the morning, that London was very quiet, and he was very surprised and taken aback by the beauty of the city at that time. Therefore, he composed this poem. This is the bridge, Westminster Bridge, at the time where when he wrote his poem. Okay. Again, this is the bridge, and this is the Big Ben. And now we'll move on to the poem. This is Westminster Bridge at the present, probably. Okay, and you see how different the pictures are. Composed upon Westminster Bridge. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul. Who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty? This city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent, bare. Ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie open onto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor valley, rock, or hill. Never saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. Fair means beautiful, dull, stupid, or not lively in spirit. Majesty, supreme greatness, glittering, sparkling, splendor, great brightness, glideth, move smoothly without effort, mighty, of great size or great in importance. In the lines 1 through 8, which together compose a single sentence, the speaker describes what he sees as he stands on Westminster Bridge, looking out at the city. يبقى لو احنا عندنا description in the first 8 lines, this means the form of this sonnet is the Petrarchan sonnet, and we have the octave and the sestet. The octave is the first 8 lines of the poem. In the first 8 lines, there is a description of what the poet sees as he is standing on Westminster Bridge, looking at the city. He begins by saying that there is nothing more fair, nothing is more beautiful on earth than the sight that he is seeing right now. And he adds that anyone who passes this spot without stopping to look and admire the scene has a dull soul. He doesn't have a lively spirit. Okay? The scene is so beautiful. London is very beautiful at the morning that nobody can see it without being surprised, without admiring the beauty of the city at this time. The poem takes place in the beauty of the morning, which lies like a blanket over the silent city. The whole city is silent. It's very early. People are asleep. The city is not busy. Nobody on the streets. Everything is so quiet and serene and peaceful. He then lists what he sees in the city and mentions that the city seems to have no pollution and lies open onto the fields and to the sky. He lists what he sees, okay? Ships, towers, domes, theaters, temples. He's listing all the things that he can see in the early morning. And what makes all these things beautiful is that the air is smokeless, there is no pollution. In lines 9 through 14, the speaker tells the reader that the sun has never shone more beautifully on valleys, rocks, or hills. Again, we have listing, like in the octet. Here, he is listing he's listing beautiful places in nature, okay? In the octave, he was listing the things that he can see, the buildings, the man-made buildings that he could see around. He was listing these beautiful buildings. Now he is listing beautiful places in nature, the valleys, the rocks, the hills. He goes on to describe the way that the river glides, the way the river moves, okay, along at the slow pace it chooses. The poem ends with an exclamation, saying that the houses or its inhabitants seem asleep and the heart of the city is still. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by, a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, silent, bare. Ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie open onto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. More fair, قلنا يعني ايه؟ more beautiful. Dull would he be, dull, stupid, not lively in spirit. Would he be of soul, who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty, in its greatness. Open onto the fields and to the sky. Everything is glittering in the smokeless air, glittering, sparkling, okay? So everything seems so clean and sparkling in this smokeless air at this time of the day. The sonnet opens with a hyperbole. Hyperbole means exaggeration. He is exaggerating what he's seeing. Nothing is more fair. Nothing is more beautiful. This is exaggeration, or in poetic language we say this is hyperbole. The earth has no other sight as beautiful as the one the poet is seeing at the present. He believes that anyone who could see the sight he's witnessing and pass by without being stunned by its beauty has a dull spirit. The city has a majestic, a majestic and royal touch, a great touch, a royal touch, okay? When it is wearing the beautiful garment of the morning, the beautiful dress of the morning. The poet then moves on from describing the beauty and silence of the morning to a list of buildings that usually abound with activity and movement and which are open into the fields and the sky. The whole city shines so bright in the unpolluted morning air. Then we move to the sestet. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor, valley, rock, or hills. Never saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. In his splendor means in his great brightness, and here the poet is referring to the sun. Again, never did sun more beautifully, exaggeration, hyperbole. He's opening the sestet with the same exaggerated language that he used in the octave. Never did sun more beautifully steep, more beautifully shone in his first splendor, in its brightness, on valleys, on rocks, on hills. Again, he is listing. Never saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth, the river flows, okay, smoothly. The river flows smoothly without an effort. And all that mighty, great of size or importance, all that mighty heart is lying still. The city, okay, the heart of the world is lying still because all the people are asleep and everything is quiet, peaceful, and serene. The sestet opens with a sense of disbelief and exaggeration again when he says that he has never seen the sunrise more beautifully when it appears and shines brightly. It lights up the hills, the rocks, the valleys. All these are elements of the natural landscape. The river is also flowing peacefully, and the whole sight brings him a sense of peace he has never experienced. He ends the sonnet by directly referring to the significance of the city, which is the mighty heart. It is significant. It is the big city, the heart of the world, okay? Composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802, this is the whole title of the poem, is an Italian sonnet written in iambic pentameter with 10 syllables per line. The rhyme scheme of the poem is A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D. So, if we look at the rhyme scheme, حتى لو بصينا له كده ونطقناه مع بعض A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, D. Okay? This rhythm, this repetitive, regular rhythm reminds us or gives us the feeling of the heartbeat, okay? The pulses of the heart. So it's again maybe because he's referring to London as the heart of the city. He's referring to it as the heart, the major part, okay? So the rhyme scheme also gives this sense of the heart beats. It is an Italian sonnet. It's divided into octave and sestet, the first 8 lines and the second 6 lines. The first 8 lines rhymes as follows: A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and then the following 6 lines, C, D, C, D, C, D. It is written in the usual iambic pentameter form. The octave, or the first 8 lines, presents a view of the city as it wears the sunlit morning like a garment. So the morning is like a garment, okay, and the whole city is wearing this beautiful morning garment. The sestet declares that this man-made formation is as beautiful in the sunlight as any natural formation, such as valleys and hills. يبقى في الأكتاف he introduced the city, okay, and he introduced the different buildings. He described the quietness, the peaceful atmosphere at that time, and then in the sestet he declares that man-made formation is as beautiful in the sunlight as any natural formation, like the valleys and the hills and all these natural elements of the world. The sestet opens with a sense of disbelief and exaggeration, the same exaggeration used at the beginning of the octave, when he says that he has never seen the sun rise more beautifully. When it appears and shines brightly, it lights up the hills, the rocks, and the valleys, the different elements of the natural landscape. And the river is flowing peacefully, and the whole sight brings him a sense of peace he has never experienced. The poem begins with a shocking statement. ايه هي shocking statement وليه shocking؟ لان he's referring to earth, he's referring to nature، بس بيقول ايه؟ earth has not anything to show more fair. الله، ازاي الرومانتك بوت وبيتكلم كده وبيقول الارث ما عندهاش حاجة احلى من كده توريها. ايه هي الحاجة دي؟ This statement is surprising بالنسبة للreaders of a romantic poet because Wordsworth is not speaking of nature but of the city. احنا قلنا ان هو he is known as the poet of nature because he loved nature, he reflected nature a lot in his poetry. So the reader is surprised because now he is not describing nature but he is expressing his admiration towards the city. He's admiring the city. He is surprised because of the beauty of the city, not because of nature so far. He goes on to list the beautiful man-made entities, okay, such as ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples. Nature's influence is not described. So far, he is describing the city. He is describing man-made beauty. Then, in the 7th line, that nature is introduced when the speaker says that the city is open to the fields and to the sky. So, nature and man-made structures complement each other's beauty. Together, they are beautiful and they complement each other's beauty. Wordsworth continues to surprise his reader by saying that the sun has never shone more beautifully even on natural things. Again, he then personifies the scene, giving life to the sun, the river, the houses, and finally to the whole city, which has a symbolic heart. The reader imagines that the city's heart beats rapidly during the day, while everything and everyone in it is bustling about. But now, in the early morning hours, the city's heart is lying still. The busiest city in Wordsworth's world, London, sleeps. And where's the beauty of the morning? By using personification in his poem, Wordsworth brings a kind of spirit to the city, which is usually seen as simple construction of rock and metal. طبعا الجزء ده Wordsworth continues to surprise the reader. ازاي؟ زي ما قال Earth has nothing more beautiful to show. قال لنا هنا برضو في السستت same exaggeration. The sun has never shone more beautifully. وعمر الشمس ما طلعت بشكل الجميل ده على حاجات غير زي دي. He then personifies the scene. عمل personification. He gives life to the sun, to the river, to the houses by personifying them. He's giving them life. Okay? And finally to the whole city, which has a symbolic heart. He uses personification in this part to give life to the whole city. The reader imagines that the city's heart beats rapidly during the day, but in the early morning, everything is very quiet, everything lying still. London is sleeping and is wearing the beauty of the morning. By using personification, he gives life to this city, which is usually seen as simple construction of rock and metal. This construction of rock and metal is given life through personification. The opening lines of the poem immediately states what the poet wants to say. This image he is confronted with, London, is quiet and sleeping. This is the image that he can see in the early morning while he was on his way to France. The image of London, quiet and sleeping. This image is the most beautiful that he can recall. He challenges the reader not to appreciate it by saying that only those without a lively soul could fail to be touched by this beautiful scene. The city is personified to seem or to look like a person sleeping. The poet seems to enjoy the contrast between how London usually appears during daytime and how it appears in the early morning, which is strikingly calming and beautiful because of the unexpectedness. This is very important. He did not expect to see London this way. He did not expect to see London and to see the beauty of London at this time of the day. It is because of this striking calmness, striking beauty, that he composes this poem admiring the beauty of nature and the beauty of London at this early time of the day. Okay? This image that he sees right now in front of him inspires him at the moment, on the spot, inspires him to write this poem about London, which, as mentioned before, is not considered as a source, as a biography, but it is considered as a record of the beauty of London at that time of the day. We will stop here and then we will apply the different figures of speech and the figurative language, and we will discuss the major ideas and of the poet and how he uses alliteration and how he uses different figures of speech in order to convey his ideas, in order to reflect the beauty of nature and the beauty of London at this time of the day. He in fact stresses the point that both nature and man-made beauty together with each other, they combine to create this beautiful scene of London at this time of the day. Thank you. وإن شاء الله هنكمل بقى application على البوم وعلى ال different figures of speech used in this poem next time إن شاء الله.